Cool, I think we love.
Greetings.
Greetings, good day. How are you today? May Sonskane Cameron Chubb.
My Sonskane Cameron Chubb is very good. I'd like to know how poor father Kai is doing today.
Yeah, Kai's also doing too good. I just realised though you're not really my Sonskane right now because there is no Sonskane, so you can be my Volkskane. Okay, that was a nice board joke to start off the podcast with. So, get us started.
So today, gentlemen and ladies, we shall be chatting about fear, false expectations / evidence appearing real.
Wow.
Yeah, it's crazy. Everything you've ever wanted is on the other side of fear.
Literally everything you could possibly think of. I mean, it's the only obstacle really to your wildest dreams. Obviously, we're going to speak more about it later, but as you like to do, I think you should ask us a couple of questions to get the thoughts flowing, get the brain juices going.
So, ladies and gents, after I ask you a series of questions, there are 8, you will pause the podcast and you will take your time to think about these questions and then you will resume. And you'll hear the ding after Kai will, make the noise. So, question 1. Can you remember what it was like to be a child? Your very first memory of being a child. Question 2. If you can, please try to describe yourself in a couple of words of how you were as a child through the picture you see of yourself. Question 3. Growing up, who were your role models, i.e. who did you want to be like when you grew up? Question 4. How often have you been in a fearful situation and it turned out differently to what you expected? Question 5. What do you fear? What do you do that makes you feel fearful? Question 6. Do you fear the truth? Do you know your truth? Question 7. How many times have you dreamt of being something, having an intention for all that you wanted from life, and didn't boldly pursue it? Question 8, the last question. How do you currently view the world right now, today?
So that first question, I mean, like you were saying to me just before we started the podcast, it can be a little bit of an emotional question looking back to your period of childhood and just the whole process of growing up and going through adolescence to becoming the people that we are today. So I know that it's been widely accepted by psychologists and physicians alike around the world that your childhood basically sets up who you're going to become one day. Like your earliest childhood traumas and memories kind of define who you're going to be later in life. Those instances that occur when you're very young will result in certain behaviors and certain characteristics that you display in your personality later on.
No, that is very true. I mean, having a younger sibling growing up and watching her from the age of birth being naught and moving through to 4 years old today. Well, being naught, maybe a minute, we should call it. I've seen how her behaviors have manifested over the years. I see how the people around her have influenced her and molded her into who she is today. And often I find my mom is also, through disciplining her, she doesn't want to break her spirit, but at the same time tries to guide her, which is a very fine line, like almost a tightrope that you walk as being a parent. And often most of our parents are role models growing up. We are very malleable as children. Our brains, our conscious is very susceptible to the world around us. But essentially, when you come into this world, you are the purest authentic power that you could ever imagine. You have literally come from the force that created all of us, the force of nature. And you're a pure, shining example of when you come into this world. So, speaking of fears, I would like to maybe discuss types of fears that you have possibly felt going through your life, ones that have really felt like a manifestation of childhood. Do you have any?
A manifestation of childhood, sure. That's pretty deep. But
it is deep, but this is the root cause of the problem.
Yeah, I might have to come back to that question, give it a little bit of thought in the background. But I don't know if you were aware, but when your sister was born, as all kids are for the first time, well, you only get born once, but you know what I'm saying. But you're born with two fears. I don't know if you know what they are.
Please elaborate.
Fear of heights and fear of loud noises. Those are the only two fears naturally ingrained into human beings. All other fears are learned. So if you see a spider, that's a learned fear because you learn, okay, spiders are dangerous, or they could be dangerous. Spiders could bite me and then I could die or get an itchy bite. I mean, it's quite a quite a big range of possibilities when it comes to spinnacorps. So, you'd rather be cautious around any spider because you don't know if that spider could bite you and then you die as a result, So, I would classify those two as probably rational fears. Obviously, heights as well. You see, okay, I'm very high up. That's a long way down. If I fall from this high up, I will get hurt or die. Same thing. So, basically, what fears really do, I think, is program us to survive, basically. It's a very natural, powerful, primitive human emotion that we all experience that has probably guided us through the whole human experience to get to this point. I'm talking about entire human civilization from the first human ever to have appeared. But back to your earlier question about fears that may have manifested from childhood through to now, can you just elaborate on that a little bit? Like,
I'm going to elaborate
in
on
terms
personal.
of rejection, like fear of rejection or fear of failure, those sorts of things? Like, maybe just elaborate.
Essentially, what I was trying to get at is any fears that you felt going through childhood and you feel like still dictate to you on a daily basis your behaviors and actions that you take. So essentially, if you're not playing your life at your highest game, which is essentially your highest potential, you have fear embedded within you at some root level. And that's essentially why people nowadays aren't becoming extraordinary. Many people fall into that bracket. I'm just an ordinary person. I'm just an ordinary bloke. But you look at every single person that has walked and graced this earth, such as a Nelson Mandela, such as a Bill Gates, the list goes on. All of those people, they did exactly what the crowds didn't do. They fell out of that bracket. They chased their dreams. They didn't let fear or what people said dictate their reality and dictate their dream. So essentially, types of fears, you get many types of fears. The list can go on for ages. Fear of failure, fear of success is a huge one. I struggled with fear of success as a child. Growing up, I always knew I was capable of doing things, but whether I would actually ever get there is another thing, and that could also be embedded with fear of failure as well. Growing up, you don't know what's going on in your body. Puberty, going into adolescence, fear rejection. Of course you do. You approach a beautiful girl in the playground and you ask her to a matric dance, and the chance you won't ask her to the extent that you feel. But fear of not being good enough is huge as well. And many of us have people's opinions and belief systems and, just society in general place a sort of cliff of fear over the heights of our dreams. We don't see past that. We don't see past this sort of small tunnel. We get tunnel vision almost. And that is essentially fear that's been embedded into us at a root level. So those are types of fears, I would say, that are pretty much controlling the world. You look at COVID-19 and you look at how uncertainty has played such a role in developing fear and manifesting fear through us as a society. The minute you can't visualize or picture how a situation is going to turn out or having endless possibilities, your mind works like a binary code, like we discussed in our previous podcast. It wants to know. It wants to know. It wants to have certainty. It wants to know yes or no. Immediately before you ask someone, say, to a matric dance, will she say yes? If you know she'll say yes, eliminates the fear. But the fact that she could say no is essentially what develops the fear in the first place, and you feel rejected, you feel like you're not good enough.
So you speak about the fear of rejection there, and it's also something that I briefly touched on in the first episode. But we aren't actually afraid of rejection itself. What our bodies are actually scared of are the physical sensations that the experience of rejection will bring about. So, you're standing there, she says, no, you ugly, or no, you smell weird. If she says something to break down the ego, you're going to be left standing there. You're going to feel this hotness rising up the back of your neck. Your hairs are going to stand on end. You're going to be very uncomfortable. You're going to be sweating a little bit likely. And it's this exact sensation that your body fears so much. It's not the actual act of being rejected. Obviously, this will affect your ego, but it's the physical sensations that your body tries to avoid at all costs.
What we're speaking of is fundamentally, how do fears really arise? Where do they come from? How do they arise in our body and make us feel uncomfortable in our own skin?
Yeah.
And, it's essentially, our soul, our spirit, is essentially uncomfortable, and that obviously manifests through our entire body. But we fail to support one another as a species, I find. Often we feel like we're competing against one another, that there has to be a winner, there has to be a loser, We hoard and we grab because we are in fear. We're in fear if one wins, like I said, the other one must lose. So we fear there isn't enough abundance and prosperity in the world. And we believe the lie that by helping someone, we will, in a result, also lose ourselves, which is completely against, our philosophy. Essentially our philosophy is, we're fundamentally cut from the same cloth. everyone is fundamentally cut from the same cloth. We're made of the same matter, as is everything on this planet. And you know that if you hurt someone, you're in fact hurting yourself. So you no longer see people as separate. You should start seeing people as one, that wherever you help someone, they're helping you as well. But this whole drive for scarcity, it's really what's developing so much fear in our society on a daily basis, because often in South Africa, we're confronted on a daily basis of poverty, of not enough food, of not enough electricity, etc., resources. And that's because a lot of people have resources, but they're not sharing these resources because they have the fear that they'll never have enough. So essentially, two huge problems in the world is that there is enough and that we feel like there'll never be enough. And that is obviously, it's a huge paradox, because there is enough resources for everyone. And this is essentially where fear is arising from. On a daily basis, you grow up and you are a fearless person. A child is fearless. You watch a child, it has courage, it is fearless of anything or anything that happens to it, really. But the longer we grow up, the more we're confronted with the problems that face the world. And this obviously develops fear within ourselves. And that is how essentially fears are arising in this new golden age, and how it has been for many years.
Yeah, fear is also related to ego quite strongly. So what you were saying there, that fear of not having, the fear of lacking, so we end up hoarding things. That's very much related to the ego, because what our ego does is it makes us feel good about ourselves, it makes us feel bad about ourselves. It's the judge onto who we are being and what we are doing, So we think deep down we know what is best for ourselves. We think we know that if we get the car of our dreams, then we're going to be happy. If we get a perfect house and marry a beautiful woman, then we're going to be happy, But at the end of the day, these aren't necessarily things that are the best for us. These could just be things that our mind is putting out there, saying, no, you need this to be happy, you need that to be happy. And then suddenly we start to worry and become fearful. Okay, what if we don't have that? Then we're never going to be happy. We're never going to acquire the state of happiness that we desire. And I saw a little video the other day as well, where there was someone speaking about the pursuit of happiness in life and how that's not actually the be-all and end-all. It's actually about having truly fulfilling things, experiencing and enjoying the ups, experiencing and enjoying the downs as well. Because without the ups, we don't have the downs. Without the downs, we don't have the ups. Without the good, we don't have the bad. Without the bad, we don't have the good. So that basically leads us to a concept called the divine dichotomy. So what the divine dichotomy is, it's basically two completely polarized points of reference, if you'd like to call it that. So basically what the divine dichotomy is saying is that without the good, we can't experience the bad. So if we remove these limits on the limits of happiness and the limits of sadness, if we said, no, you could be 100 times happier than this, you could be 100 times sadder than that, if we completely removed all of the limits, we would just have an eternal state of being. There wouldn't be a good or a bad. There'd always be something better than the best and something worse than the worst. The divine dichotomy also says that as a person, you can be something and you cannot be that same thing at the same time. So, for example, you could know yourself as a generous person, but you could be a generous person and a selfish person simultaneously. These are not mutually exclusive events. So basically what the divine dichotomy is saying, in my understanding, is that there's no such thing as mutual exclusivity. Everything can be exactly as it is, and things can contradict each other without any problem, as we would experience in our physical world, for example.
No, it's highly interesting. It's almost a fact of elimination. In order to know what one thing is, you need to know what it isn't.
Yeah.
And what you're basically saying is you can be both at the same time. So you can be fearful and not fearful at the very same time. But the thing is, we can have healthy fears in this life. Healthy fears do drive us, and it has helped us survive. But what I'm thinking is rather have healthy fears that help us thrive, and not just to survive. And when you shift from a compulsion to survive into a heartfelt commitment to serve one another, when you know that we are fundamentally cut from the same cloth and that you will help this person, you will inadvertently help yourself, your life cannot help but explode into success. And that's truly my belief. So as we've spoken about, what do fears do to us? So the repression of fear. So now that we feel fear, we don't want to feel it anymore, because now you've said your body feels uncomfortable. So obviously we start repressing fear. We repress it, we don't want to feel it. We're like, no, I'm not feeling fearful today. But then repression of fear creates sponsoring emotions. And sponsoring emotions essentially are emotions that manifest from fear. That can be anxiety, self-loathing, low self-esteem. So if we're talking about repression of fear, what exactly is the repression of fear for you? How do you feel that you repress? Do you repress fear on a daily basis? Do you feel fear? Do you feel anxiety? Do you feel anxious? Do you feel, sometimes out of sorts? How do you interact with fear on a daily basis?
No, I think naturally we all have fear. That's unavoidable. It's part of the human experience. We can't stop fear. Rather, we must learn how to use fear to our advantage. So if we have feelings of anxiety, for example, it's not really going to serve us in the bigger picture. We need to learn that this is simply a projection of our mind trying to understand a potential outcome or trying to select a certain outcome that might be the most desirable or worrying about the one that's most undesirable. So this is also something that I've touched on in the first episode, like basically if we constantly projecting our thoughts into the future, then we are going to experience feelings of uncertainty and therefore fear and anxiety. For me personally, on a daily basis, obviously there is the natural, I guess you could call it fear of failure. No one wants to fail. So obviously pretty much every single action that myself and most other people make is to avoid failing, or to avoid not failing in the sense of like, you try to start a business and it fails. Like, I don't actually know what kind of failure I mean, but like, we know we want to avoid certain outcomes. So I guess you could say that these certain outcomes could be considered failure in our minds.
Yeah, we place an image on what failure is, and failure for everyone else is completely different. Some person could be like, I failed as in I didn't pass, or I failed as in I didn't come. So everyone has a different definition of exactly what fear is. And as you spoke of, whenever your mind oscillates into the future or the past, you have fear of regret. You don't want to regret anything in life. So that's usually your past, where you've done things that you usually can't look at. You fear, how did I impact that person? But it's past, so you can't control it. You look into the future and your mind plays stories. It really does. False evidence appearing real. False expectations appearing real. That's essentially where fear starts manifesting. You think of what if. So the minute you start a task, the minute you start a course, the minute you start any venture in your life, your mind immediately goes, but what if? And that's the survivalist sort of element within you, because your mind wants you to survive. It wants you to thrive as well. But you got to know how to channel it. You got to know how to channel your fear. And essentially what you want to start developing is courage. And courage isn't the absence of fear, as we've spoken of. It's just the ability to walk through it. So essentially anyone's, like you've said, is going to have fear. But you need to be willing and self-disciplined to walk through that fear if you want that fear to serve you. And it's absolutely fine to have fear. There's nothing wrong with fear. And right or wrong, like we've said, is so subjective. In order to feel fear, you need to know what love is as well. That's the divine dichotomy right there. Like, you could love someone but fear them at the exact same time. Because you love this person, but you fear that your love for this person will inadvertently hurt you. That's absolutely fine. And that's what happens on a daily basis. So when I spoke of what exactly is the repression of fear, so everyone knows, well, maybe you don't, but obviously we have a soul, our spirit. What we're speaking of in this podcast is spirituality. It's obviously the spirit, it's the conscience. Yeah. So we're going to label the spirit the witness today, myself and Kai. And we're going to imagine your consciousness as a witness. So in our deep place of knowing, we do not live authentically. Our witness will know it. If we cheat or lie in a test, or if we cheat or lie to a loved one, our conscience knows it. Our witness sees it. You cannot get past whatever your soul is feeling. When you feel anxious, it's because your soul has seen something. You've been repressing fear. When we dishonor ourselves and our witness sees that we're not living to our highest potential, we end up self-betraying ourselves. We're not living to our highest game because we have root fear at an embedded level that is now controlling our actions, controlling our future. So it leads to actually a slow and painful death. And I know that sounds very negative, but so often you find people in this world, before they even get to their deathbed, that they died millions of years, well, not millions of years ago, but many years ago. 20, 30 years ago, they felt like life was over for them. They merely just existed. And this was self-betrayal of self. And the witness cannot believe what we are doing to ourselves. We're acting incongruent to our values and our moral code. And we know it, but we do and choose nothing to do about it. We build walls of belief systems of denial. As we spoke of with the mind is so clever. It has fear, but it builds false evidence around this truth that we have in life, and that's what inadvertently creates the fear. So the witness begins to withdraw, shuts down, we begin to lose self-respect, begin to feel angry and irritable, and then eventually, physically, so not just as our mind now ill, our body begins to grow ill. We lack vitality, we lack energy. And that is the mind, body, soul connection. That is the Holy Trinity that we will talk about later in the season. But essentially, what do you think of that, Kai? Do you think that's interesting? Do you think you feel that as well? Do you? Do you know when you lie?